that I used when I first started fishing, it cost $25 for a license, and you could fish for whatever you wanted to within the season. And there was seasons, but there was different things, and it cost $25. And there was 4 million people in the state of California at that time, and now there's over 40 million people in the state of California. And when I first started, pretty much everybody in California, they knew what fishing was. They knew what commercial fishing was. And I truly feel that today, 85% of the people in the state don't even know that this industry exists or anything about it. All they know is that fishing is bad from what they see on TV, because there's overfishing, there's this, there's that. This country's fishing industry, both coasts, there is no overfishing. Everything is regulated, monitored. I don't know if you look at my boat, I fish in what's called the IFQ fishery. I'm the only boat that does that. I'm federally monitored. I have 4 cameras that run the entire time I'm fishing. I'm 100% accountable for every fish that comes over the rail of that boat, whether I keep it or it goes back. I fill out log books. I pay the government 6.5% of my gross income to be in that program. It's we're the most regulated fishing industry in the world, and yet they keep wanting to make it harder and more restrictive, and they're restricting us basically out of business. So, I can't understand why, other than it makes certain different organizations look like they live on donations. Some of the environmental groups, and they portray us in a bad light. They get people to donate to help save the whales. We're all about saving all that stuff. We have spent thousands of dollars modifying our gear, trying to work with the things that live in the environment. I don't want to kill whales. They're the most majestic creature in the ocean. I get to see them every day when I'm at work. I'm lucky, and I don't like being painted as a person that's destroying. They say one death is too many. They don't stop people from. How many dead deer do you see on the road? You guys can't drive anymore. You got to walk to work. Even if it's 50 miles, you got to walk, because you might kill a deer. But nobody takes that into consideration, because they see that they're saving the planet,
So I'm here with,
Bill Blue.
and Bill, what is your occupation?
I'm a commercial fisherman.
And where were you born?
I was born in the city of Orange, California, in 1956.
And how did you get here to Morro Bay?
As a young boy growing up in my town, in my childhood town, I had a good friend that his parents raised horses and had property in San Luis Obispo. So I've been coming to Morro Bay, San Luis Obispo area since about 1965. And when I graduated from high school in 1974, I wanted to move away from where I'd grown up, and I'd been coming to this beautiful place as a kid, and I got married, and I moved to Morro Bay.
And were you at all connected to the fishing industry? Maybe your parents or grandparents down in SoCal?
No, my only connection to the fishing industry was as a kid growing up, that I sport fished with my dad. We'd go sport fishing in San Diego and Newport Beach, and I fished in lake. I was avid, not avid, but I sport fished a lot as a kid. I spent a lot of time in the ocean, and I surfed. So the ocean was kind of my sanctuary, I guess you could say. It's where I went to relax and enjoy myself. That was part of the reason that I moved to Morro Bay, was because I'd been surfing here, and so I started going to a junior college and was surfing, and then I got to firsthand experience all the boats and the fishing activity that was taking place in Morro Bay at that time, and it kind of interested me. So I asked around, and eventually found I had I was fresh out of high school, and I didn't have a job, and was going to the junior college, and I needed a job, so I started walking around on the docks trying to find a job. And after a couple month and a half or so, I got offered a job, and um, I went down onto the dock and sat on the dock at the boat that somebody had directed me to for 2 or 3 hours, and the guy was working on his boat at the time, doing a welding project, and he walked back, and I didn't know his name, I just knew that he was possibly looking to hire somebody. And after a few hours, he stopped and looked up at me and flipped his welding helmet up, and he said, "Do you want something?" And I said, "Jim said that you might be looking for somebody." And he said, "Have you ever been crabbing?" And I said, "No." He said, "Do you get seasick?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, then be here at 1 in the morning." So I showed up at 1 in the morning, and I've been fishing ever since.
And do you remember who that was in the boat?
Oh yeah, it was Fred Cefalu. His boat called the Susan Marie. He's a fourth generation Italian fisherman from San Francisco whose family moved down here in the 50s. I was fortunate to. I had no idea who it was I was talking to, and that the job that I had gotten hired for was probably one of the most sought after jobs by anybody looking for work in the town, because he was one of the top producing fishermen. He fished salmon, albacore, crab, nets. He'd fished his whole life, and
You had a immediate in right there.
I had, as far as not knowing that at that point that I wanted to make fishing, my career. I was indoctrinated into one of the most hardworking, productive businesses that was here in Morro Bay at the time.
And do you remember the year that was?
That was the winter of 1974-75.
So you've been fishing
40, almost going on 50 years.
50 years. Yeah. And when you started, do you remember what the harbor looked like? Was there any changes to the Embarcadero or maybe past Beach Street?
Well, when I first started fishing, there was no sidewalks. There was no curbs. There was a few places on the Embarcadero. Businesses used to stay. The restaurants that had bars and whatnot would be open till 1 or 2 in the morning. Not many local. The town was small, and in the summertime, it would be populated with Central Valley tourist people would come over. So the businesses were thriving. They were open. They had a lot of business, and there was a lot going on. It was fun. So it's changed. The waterfronts, some of the businesses where they were changed, and it's not. It's definitely different.
Mm-hmm. Were there any processors here?
Oh yeah, there was an oyster company down there, the Johnson Oyster Company. There was at the far end there was a buying station. Orville League had a real nice big dock. They bought albacore, they bought dragfish, they bought all kinds of stuff. He had oysters. There was the Finicky Fish Market where the House of Juju is. That was a unloading station for Central Coast Seafood. The Brebs family had the dock that's now Giovanni's, and they were still processing abalones. Commercial abalone fishing was still very lucrative, and had been extremely lucrative in the past before I moved here. It was the number one industry here, the abalone industry was. And then there was Starkist had a dock here. Brebs used this dock where I'm tied up to unload. There was a Gold Nugget Seafood. Brebs that had the oyster company, they had a processing station here on the Beach Street on the right-hand side coming down. There was lots of stuff going on.
Mm-hmm. And now they're all gone. Did they leave in quick succession?
No, it was kind of a slow. Once it started, it was kind of a slow progression, and it just got where the cost of water for the processing got to where it wasn't affordable for them, you know, because processing fish takes a lot of fresh water, and that there was water shortage, and there was restrictions on the industry that the trawl industry kind of got slowed way down. So some of those boats that had been fishing here moved north, where the processing plants and the market orders and stuff were still better, more lucrative for their operation. They moved away from here, but the salmon and different things like that, those fisheries, they still existed, and there was small processing when Giovanni's took over Brebs. There was Central Coast Seafood. A guy named Mike DeGaramore was a very avid fish buyer. He bought all kinds of fish, and they processed it, did different things. The dock over here had a fillet line for a while after Gold Nugget, which was a co-op owned by a handful of fishermen here, started the business, and that went away when the people across the lots, there was vacant lots looking down onto the Embarcadero, and as time passed and those lots sold, and people built, the people that built the homes there, they were expensive homes. People had a lot of money. They weren't from around here, and they didn't like the smell from the processing plants and the noise and all that stuff. And for quite a few years, we still had people in the city council that were pro fishing, and they were able to ward off the people going to city council and complaining. And as time changed and more people from out of the area moved here from other places, they didn't care what Morro Bay used to be like. They wanted Morro Bay to be like they wanted it to be. So as those people, as the numbers of those peoples moved into the area, and the numbers of us who had been here, generational people, way before my time, those families had started to, their siblings had started to look at other means of employment other than fishing, you know, the stuff that was going on here. So they looked for different types of work. As the price of housing rose, as people from out of the area started to move in from other areas that had money, the real estate market went up. It became more difficult for people that were born and raised here to stay here. So people started to move to Atascadero, Paso Robles. I myself moved to Templeton 9 years ago. So it just, we kind of got priced out of existence, of being able to survive here in this area.
Tourism, that is, or
well, not so much. I mean,
transplants.
I would say transplants. You know, people. You know, I as a kid when I moved here, I wasn't, you know, into growth. I mean, I moved from where I grew up because it was exploding with people, and you know, they were tearing down the places I used to play as a kid and building homes and all this other stuff. So I wanted away from that. And then I moved here, and for the first 10 or so years here, it was a real slow pace. There was a little development. People were building in Los Osos. And I started to realize, you know, as I got a little older, that, you know, a stagnant economy wasn't a good economy. Things can't just stay the same forever. You know, it'd be nice, but it's not the way the world works. So people started to come, and they pretty much built up all the property that they could. So then there was a water moratorium, and things got even more expensive, and it just became harder and harder. If you weren't able to grab a little bit at a certain point in your life, it became harder and harder to actually be a homeowner or find something, you know. So that kind of changed the complexity of the town itself. Most of the fishermen, when I first started moving here, lived right here in Morro Bay. And then after about 15 years, people started moving to where it was less expensive to live and just a short commute, you know, to work. Instead of, I had a house right up here by Black Mountain for 20 something years, and it was 2 minutes I was to my boat. Now I drive 35 minutes, and when I come to work, I don't have any traffic at 2 or 3 in the morning, or when I go home. So I don't, I like people in LA that takes them an hour and a half to go 15 miles to get to work and get home every day. I mean, I understand the difference, but it gets so crowded here now that I won't come over and work on my boat on the weekend because I can't find a place to park. Um, the people that drive, they're rude. They have, I don't need to have a bad day. If I can avoid having a bad day, I avoid having a bad
Yeah.
day. So yeah, I mean, it's scenically, it's as beautiful as it ever was. It's one of the most beautiful places on the coast. But crowd wise, you know, it's not how I moved over to Templeton 9 years ago, and I'd always wanted to live in the North County because I like the heat and I'm in the fog and the wind all the time with my job. And we found a little place out of town because I have animals. I have horses and mules, and I started raising sheep about 3 years ago. It's just a little project, and I thought that I was out in the middle of nowhere, and I didn't realize how much that area had grown. With how that's changed from being a dry farm, ag, cattle, to the wine industry, to money. The whole few restaurants that were there that had been there forever have closed and changed. It's a whole different environment, and that money from outside areas and different interests has moved in and uprooted, or I want to say uprooted, but changed the topography of east of Highway 101.
It's just changed everything. The transplants.
Yeah, I mean, it's I would, it's a different world. It's a different world in a lot of ways. It's a different world in the way that the younger kids think. What's important to them is not what was important to me. When I was at that age. So I tell, a lot of times when people want to ask about fishing or what's going on or what do you think, I kind of feel like I'm not the one that should be being asked because I still think back here, and the people taking my place are thinking over here. So I guess it's just part of, when you reach that age where you're not, it doesn't really matter what I think because there's a whole lot of other people that don't think the same way that I do. So you just kind of get disenchanted and figure, I know how my parents felt now when I was a kid growing up. It's just, that's how it goes. I have grandkids now. I have, my kid, my daughter's, and she's 45, and my youngest son's 37, and I got 5 grandkids, and they were all raised. My kids were raised how I raised them, and I watch my kids. I see a few similarities, but there's a different mindset now because some book says, you need to do this and this and this, or your kid's going to be screwed up, and I view it as doing a little more damage than the way we used to do things, but again,
Different times.
different times, different times. And, I had my time. I had some really good times over the course of my fishing career. I've had some bad times, as in any business. I was married 20 years and had 3 kids, and the fishing business that I was in put a heavy strain on that relationship, and I got divorced 20 years into my first marriage, and I've been remarried for 27 years now to my second wife, and I can give her the credit of me being able to stay in the. She knew because we dated for a little bit, and she saw what my lifestyle was, and she basically came. My kids were at kind of an inopportune. My youngest son was 6, 10, and 12, 13. My daughter at the time, when I separated with my first wife, and my second wife kind of came in and allowed. I couldn't fish because we had custody of the kids. I had to share time with, as the divorce was going on, and my wife of today came in and took care of the kids and allowed me to be able to continue to work and fish in a kind of a modified schedule from what I had done previously, but at least I was able to keep fishing, and there was somebody there for the kids. And if it hadn't been for her, I don't know that I would have been still doing what I do today, because it takes a pretty special person on the other side of this business to be supportive and be left, alone for long periods of time. And, most relationships are built on being together all the time, where, in this business, spend a lot of time apart. And so if you don't work with each other, and it's tough. It's a hard business. Mm-hmm. On a family, on relationships. So you don't. I didn't make a lot of birthdays, my kids, because if the weather was good, I needed to fish. I couldn't just say, well, I'm going to take tomorrow off. We didn't have a 5-day work week where you worked Monday to Friday. You worked around the weather, you worked around the season, you worked around whatever was thrown at you to be able to be successful in the catching of whatever season it was at the time. And for salmon fishing, salmon season would start. We'd start here, and we'd end up in Northern California in Fort Bragg. We'd be gone 3, 4 months, 5 months. Occasionally, if you knew the weather was going to be bad for a week or whatever, the family would come up to where we were, or I would come home. But it wasn't like I could make every baseball game, or I could make everything that was going on. I couldn't adjust my schedule to do that for a long time. A little different now with my grandkids. I can kind of work around that. So I'm trying to enjoy the things that I missed with some of the things that I missed with my kids growing up, mm-hmm. with my grandkids.
It sounds like a big challenge, a very big challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Do you want to be successful here, or do you want to be successful over here? And I think, that's probably true of, because I don't know other professions, because this is all I've ever done, but you look and, other jobs have demands, and I'm not trying to say that fishermen are the only people that have a tough schedule and lifestyle, because it's that way with other businesses as well. It just, the first go around, I felt sorry, not sorry, but I understood the difference. When you're 18 years old, you don't know where you're going. I mean, we thought we did at those times, but you look at things now, kids don't even get married till they're 30. Some of them don't have kids till they're 40, so that's just, it's different, and she didn't know that she was going to be stuck in a situation where her husband was going to be gone all the time, and sometimes there was good income, and sometimes there was bad income, and sometimes there was no income, and things were tough. So
what are some of the other challenges that you faced back then, both then and now, and are they the same or different?
I think they're different. I think they're different. For me, adjusting to a lifestyle that I was unfamiliar with. Like I said, I didn't come from a fishing family. A lot of the people that were my age, a little younger than me, or just a little bit older, their parents had been fishermen. I didn't understand the business of it. I mean, I was young, and we made good money, and I always figured, well, it's always going to be like this. I didn't have somebody that taught me how to save at an early age and set aside for when times were bad. So I struggled financially. I did very well fishing, but I didn't understand money management. So it was that was a struggle. It took me until I got married the second time to figure that out. So it's yeah, there's no retirement. There's no, paid vacation. There's no, you're a sole proprietor. I mean, you're 100% responsible for how, what happens, and I think that's part of a big part of the reward, or was always is that if you get up and you make the right decision and you have a good day, it, you feel good about yourself because it wasn't because somebody gave you an insider tip or I mean, you decided to go this place and fish in this place, or you thought the fish were going to do this. It's kind of like hunting. You're hunting, and sometimes you have a successful hunt, and sometimes you don't. And when you do, it's pretty self-rewarding. And you can come home. I pretty much can say at the end of the when I would come home, when I go to sleep at night, I felt pretty good about what I'd done. I always felt like that my job was important, and the people that were in my industry, we provide food. We're just like a farmer. We provide food for people, and something that somebody wants. And I always felt good that that my job had some merit, because I was a food producer,
Mm-hmm.
and I still feel that way. Marketing's changed, but it's nice to know that when I go out, when I come in, it's something that people are gonna eat. So.
And talking about retirement, Jeremiah is part of like some insurance thing. I think Giovanni did he start that as well?
No, that started a group of fishermen in Bodega Bay area started that United Reserve Fund, and I'm in that insurance pool. I didn't get into it until the '90s. I could have been in it earlier, but I've been in it for a long time, and it's it again needs to keep it going. It needs new members, because as you retire, as guys are getting older and getting out, then they get a dividend back. The way it works, you pay a regular percentage rate, maybe a little higher than commercial insurance, but as your time invested in the pool goes on, you become vested. And now I don't, unless, depending on how the year goes, if there's any claims or losses, what used to cost me $10,000 or $12,000 a year for the insurance on my hull and my machinery, I don't pay anything for it, because the money that I've paid over the years has been invested, and now those investments are paying for my premium and building. And then we have a liability pool as well that is kind of the same thing. It's a little higher, I'm trying to think of actual number that it costs, but I have $750,000 of liability insurance because I have two crewmen. Not all the time, but I pay for two crewmen throughout the year so that I don't have to jump back and forth. And it's probably $400 a month a guy for the insurance. And if you're not fishing a lot, it's pretty expensive insurance. But you can't. I can't consciously go to work without having it. The fact that I could lose my house, that I could lose my boat, that I could, if I had some kind of claim, and I've been very fortunate in the entire time that I've been fishing to never have a claim. And I think most people are in that situation that they haven't had a claim, but their accidents do happen, and you have to protect yourself. But it's a good thing that they started. It's just it's those of us that are still in, it's kind of like Social Security. Is it going to run out? Well, before I stop fishing, am I going to be able to it's not a lot of money, depending on how much longer I
not
fish.
Enough for like a retirement.
No. It's I think a friend of mine that had been there for a long time, I think it was like $30,000, you know, and you don't get it all at one time. You get it over, I think they spread it out over a 7-year period or something, but it's something,
Mm-hmm.
for something that you pay into regular insurance, and then when you're done, you get nothing, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I wanted to ask you about like, well, maybe not processors, but your buyers. There's not, obviously there's not trucks here and processors or whatever, right here.
right.
Um, and some people have been talking about scrambling to find buyers and things like that. And even I think it was a 76 or something. Jeremiah and Trudy were up in uh, Oregon or something. They couldn't find a buyer there. And they're just always talking about trying to find buyers nowadays. How did you like? Do you have a set buyer? Do you have to jump ship sometimes and find some new guys?
With the crab, I had a set buyer, before the season would start. Crab is a kind of still a high demand product, so there's several processing companies that buy crab, and there's basically 400 boats in the state of California that fish during the commercial dungeness crab season, and those boats split up between four, I would say, established big companies, and then there's some Asian live buyers guys, that they don't really have, per se, a plant. They have a truck with live tanks, and they buy. Some of them are pretty big, and they buy a lot of crab. They usually pay a little more money. Um,
Do you go through either or sometimes?
I pretty much stay with the established buyer. Uh, I used to in the 80s and 90s. I drove a lot of my crab myself. I did both kinds of crab. I did rock crab and dungeness. My rock crab markets were in the greater LA area. So twice a week, my truck, I would load my ketchup into my truck. Sometimes I drove it. Sometimes my dad drove it for me. At the time, my mom and dad had retired and moved here in the early 80s. So my dad helped me out with the business a little bit by driving the delivery truck uh, quite a bit for probably 10 years. So we had our own route. We had our own established markets, retail markets down Redondo Beach, San Pedro, Santa Monica, that we delivered to twice a week. And at that time, I was moving during the season. I would move my dungeness crab to them. So for a while, I marketed everything myself, and then that was fishing out of here. And then when I would go to the north to fish, I would deal with an established buyer, and that worked out real well. Now with the black cod, I was dealing with Santa Monica Seafood across their dock. Even in the mid 2000, 2010, 2000, 2009 to 2012 or 13, I was driving a lot of my fish to San Francisco to an established buyer who was my crab buyer at the same, when I was up there crabbing. And I was getting I was making 50 cents more a pound for driving the fish up there. So I did that for a few years. And then I started to sell. Just Santa Monica Seafood was buying enough of my fish that I just started selling to them here. And then they kind of scaled back their business plan with the black cod when the overseas, for 10 or 12 years, most it wasn't with black cod. It wasn't who was going to buy it. It was who was going to buy it and who was going to pay a little bit more money. And again, we tried to stay with the same market, and then the dollar value in Japan changed, and that market tanked. We went from averaging $3.45 to $3.50 a pound for our trip, and the way that we get paid is the different sizes of fish would get a different amount of money. Smaller fish being the lowest price, the larger fish being the higher price. But we would average for the trip about $3.40 to 50 cents a pound, and that was in 2010 to 2013. And today, same fish, I'm lucky if I average $2, maybe a little over $2 a pound for the same product, because none of it's going overseas anymore. That price is even worse. We deal strictly with a fresh market, and it's mainly in the LA area. Um, I sell to, I don't sell direct, I sell across the dock to another individual now that's taken the Santa Monica dock over, and he's picked up some of the same markets that Santa Monica was distributing my fish to. So,
Is that the roses?
yes, yeah, and so it's still working, you know. But I would say now that if I come in, the other day I delivered 7,000 pounds of fish, and I would say that 7,000 pounds of fish probably went to 8 different people through the roses into the LA area, just like Santa Monica used to do, to different places, and then those places dwindle it down to the next level of the buying chain, and then it goes to the public from there.
Did you ever sell local, like maybe to the Tognazzini's?
Oh yeah, there's all a couple 100 pounds here. Giovanni's would take, I supplied them with black cod, what they needed for their retail market. And then they had things going on there where they would sell to the different restaurants. I had some direct restaurant accounts, here that I 5 fish here, 10 fish here, more of somebody that wanted the specialty, item that I could, bring once in a while. So there's just not that much consumption, there's starting to be, but a lot of it now, the restaurants through the county, some of the larger companies in Oregon can offer, they offer the other seafood products that a restaurant uses. And there's no processing place here. I'm not licensed to fillet fish and then wrap it and distribute it to the restaurants. And my fishing schedule is weather dependent, where these other trucks, come from these other companies. They get the fish at a lesser price. They have it all the time, whether it be fresh frozen that they thaw or whatever. So a restaurant that does a lot of volume needs a product that they can say, if I'm going to put this on my menu,
it's consistent.
It's consistent. And that's the way the rockfish used to be here. All these restaurants, when I was a kid growing up, all the fish and chips came from right here. And now none of the restaurants use local fish. They'll have it as a special item for, on the special board. But the fish and chips is all Arctic cod, frozen cod, because it's cheaper, and they have it. It's frozen. It's not perishable. They thaw it out as they need it. So we kind of got bumped to that, and then we used to get 25 cents a pound when I first was fishing rockfish. And now guys are, $2, there's limited amount, there's quotas, you can't, bring in enough to everybody, all the restaurants here and there's no Tognazzini processes a little bit, but he can't process enough for the entire San Luis County. Let's just say San Luis County. Mm-hmm. And I think the boats here could produce enough that people could have, but
you just have no buyers.
There's no processing set up. So there's like I said, it's adapting and changing. So there's these niche markets, and if to participate in those, you have to have a low overhead operation and a high return on what you're selling. So and then you're more than fishing. Then you're involved with the catching, with the processing, with the delivery, and it's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot. It's not a lot for a young guy, you know, that wants to hustle like the roses, you know. I knew him when he first, Garrett, the son, that's the driving force of taking the dock over. His dad and I fished together in the black cod fishery. I watched him grow up from being a little kid, you know, and he's driven. He wants to fish. He wants to sell fish, and he's aggressive. And you, that's the only way that you're going to survive in this business is to be aggressive and do a lot more than just go catch the fish. Catching the fish is the easy part nowadays. It's always the fishing part of it's always been the easier part. The marketing has gotten harder and harder and harder as time's gone on.
Is there anyone like Garrett that's in the area that's kind of another driving force?
Uh,
Maybe not in Morro, but maybe down
uh,
south.
I'm sure some of the where he fished a lot out of Santa Barbara before he moved back up here because he got better value for what he was catching there, right there coming in, and the economy was better there. You know, more income, higher income economy there. People would pay more for the fish. He was closer proximity to the Orange County area where the black cod, a lot of it goes because there's a lot of Asian areas down there. Um, so he kind of bullied his way into that scenario down there and became familiar with all the markets. He started with salmon. He saw the potential to go to Northern California and buy salmon off the boats and then drive it down himself and market it to these. He might make 20 stops,
Mm-hmm.
and he was doubling his money, but he was on the road, and at the same time he was fishing his boat for black cod, and then he would deliver his black cod. He would coordinate with the boats that were up that he knew through his growing up in the fishing industry. Um, he had a handful of boats, which grew into a bigger handful of boats, and they would all come into the same port at the same time, and he would be there and pay them a little more money than what the established buyer was paying, and drive it down and distribute it from here to San Diego.
Oh,
You know, yeah,
sounds like a lot.
from Bodega Bay to San Diego. Buy it here, sell it there, and he had a reputation with the people that he was selling to. The boats that he bought fish from had a quality product. He took care of it in the interim before he delivered it to them, and he did really well. And then there hasn't been a salmon. Last year there was no salmon season. This year there's no salmon season. Eventually there'll be a salmon season again, and that will help his operation because he'll have that besides the black cod and the live nearshore fish and the stuff that's going across the dock now. The dock for years, for the last, I don't know, 6 or 7 years, when Santa Monica had it, they had a plant, they had a place over the hill in Atascadero where they did processing, and they slowly stopped the processing because of the expense of doing it. They could buy stuff that was already processed and then just repackage it with their label on it, and they do a distribution route. So they didn't need that. So that affected things, and then it became where they were just it was very good that they kept the dock open for as long as they did, because I think they were, for the last 3 or 4 years, they were operating at a loss. But they had the Morro Bay name. Fish comes from Morro Bay, whether it actually did or not. But they weren't aggressively looking for markets for guys like myself and for the other fish that were coming in, halibut, sea bass, salmon. They weren't really trying to promote things that would benefit the guys that were still here fishing. We had to unload around they had a trucking schedule, so if you came in with fish and it wasn't on a day that they had a truck here, you had to either wait or not go fishing, or it didn't work with the guy on the other end. Now the dock works all the time. I come in at 7 o'clock, 10 o'clock. Somebody that wants the fish wants it the next day. They're there. They unload me. It goes on the truck. That's the way the fishing business used to be, you know. So it it's a good thing, you know. And there's competition, you know. Mark buys fish. Casey over here at Geo, she buys fish, and you know, so there's not just one person that's buying fish. You know, I could sell everything over here if I wanted to. Well, not everything, because she wasn't able to move the black cod as well as Santa Monica or Garrett was, because there's a lot of. But they during COVID, when everybody was complaining that there was, oh, I can't go fishing, you know, I don't have a market. I had one of my best years. She was marketing the fish. She bought a lot of fish from me, and they were, because they have a delivery system that's all over the United States. So my black cod was going everywhere through them. She was making money. I was making money. It was great. And then when COVID stopped, people went back to the, you know, so that market that was developed kind of closed. Yeah, or it slowed way down. She still has a little bit of it, you know, but people can go out and shop, so they don't have to have something delivered to their door. Mm-hmm. But I capitalized on that, you know. It was good for my business. It wasn't good for some people, but it was good for me.
It's another pivot.
Yeah. It was a change, you know. People said, I don't have a market, and I said, well, I do. You know.
Did COVID seriously affect everyone in here, or is it small enough to be able to sell?
No, I think it affected everybody. You know, it affected a lot of people because of who they marketed to or how they sold, and I mean, it was a strain on everything. You know, I just got lucky. Mm-hmm. You know, and I ran the numbers, and I mean, I didn't get a check in the mailbox. You know, I didn't qualify for any of that stuff because I was working, and my crew was working. So that's just kind of always been my deal is I'll work. You know, sometimes maybe for a little less, but over the course of the year, it ends up being okay. You know.
Yeah, and you were talking about the closure of the salmon season. Do you think that's a wise decision to let the salmon repopulate, or do you think it's regulation has done more harm than good? Do you think that's true?
I don't think it can't. It's not going to hurt for those fish not to come out of the ocean. As far as the resource goes, the numbers, they do the. I haven't been actively, in the salmon fishery since the early 2000s, but it definitely hurts. People, again, you become used to something, and then you don't have it. And if you're a consumer and you don't have something, well, then you find something that's going to replace that. So when that comes back available, do you go back to it with the same vigor that you were when you knew you were going to get it all the time? It takes time to build markets. And then when you pull that product away for a few years and then try and put it back, it takes a while to build it again. So, and it puts stress, it puts stress. You put people that everybody's doing different things. And if you take away this, then you have more people doing one thing, which can put more strain on that resource. It definitely puts more strain on the market because that product is coming from more different channels. And then it starts to become, instead of how are we going to get more money, it's who's going to sell it for a little less so they can sell it. Period. So the price goes down. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't help the whole industry as a whole with the marketing thing. It's better if we refer to it as have lateral movement. So hey, that this is kind of slow. That this isn't very good this year. So I'm gonna leave this alone, and I'm gonna go do this. Well, with all the restrictions and closures, some people are built into a box where they got to keep doing whatever it is they're doing because that's all they can do. They can't afford a permit to do something else or whatever. So you're going to keep fishing through a slow cycle or a slow year because you can't go do something else anymore. I mean, it was the permit thing is good. The limited entry thing, yeah, it had its need at the time. Um, Most of the restrictions that were put on to help preserve the resource were well intended. Some of the science and the time of the closures was not correct because they had never done anything like that before. So some of the rebuilding processes for some of the resources, they could have been opened back up sooner because the resource had rebounded or didn't take the fish quite as long to grow as they thought it. They had all these doom and gloom. Oh, that fish is 100 years old, and things have rebounded pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
We just don't have the access to go back and harvest in areas that have been closed. We don't ever seem to get whatever they've taken away. We never seem to get it back. So once we lose something, you kind of figure that's gone, and that it shouldn't be that way. It should be you give it up and then you get it back. And if you get it back in moderation, that's okay. I mean, there's ways to ensure that there's going to be fish.
So it helped initially, you'd think, and now that the fish populations have rebounded, it's just a hindrance to you. And
Yeah, because they should they should let us they should let us go fishing. They should make everybody have cameras like I have, so that if they have rules, that everybody's following the rules. And I don't want to have a camera. If you're not doing anything you're not supposed to, what's the problem? It's been almost 16 years now that I've had those cameras and had this reporting thing going on. In the very beginning, it was a way to be involved in something, and now it's just like I don't even think about it. It's just part of my business model. It's what I have to do certain times of the year. We have tracking devices for the crab fishery now, electronic. We have VMS. We have all these things that are enforceable. So they should let us go back to work in places that they were worried about.
mm-hmm. Do you think someday that there will be like a middle ground between these fishermen and these people making regulation? Or do you think that time has passed, and now that nobody who fishes is in city council or making these decisions, now they're not there. It's kind of
Right.
over for you guys.
In a way, I mean, there's not. I think there's a small segment of this community here, this waterfront, will hopefully stay designated to the commercial fishing industry. I mean, even in Santa Barbara, they have an area it kind of had the same kind of pinch. It got overpopulated a long time ago, but that's a huge, the harbor of Santa Barbara and the fisheries that take place out of that area, big economic fisheries, guys, urchins, abalones, the sea bass, all the different things, it was a very productive harbor, a lot of money went across and still goes across that dock there. They're jammed in one little corner. It's expensive to live there. It's expensive to keep your boat there. It's all, it's all relative. And here I pay $130 more for a slip that I don't have right now because they're finally in the process of rebuilding it than I paid for a real nice concrete slip in Bodega Bay this year, So I could save $150 if I kept my boat in Bodega Bay. But the fisheries that I participate in and the marketing thing is here, and I live here.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll figure out a way to somehow keep doing that here. You know.
Yeah, I've heard that dungeness at least is better, around Fort Bragg, Bodega, and not so much past San Francisco. Is that the case? Do you find that there's
Well, it's dungeness crab is the fishery. It's a cyclic fishery, so you have good years, you have bad years. Um, the way that the fishery's set up, it's probably one of the most sustainable fisheries that there is because there's a season, there's a size, and there's a sex. You don't take females. The crabs have to be a certain size to be legal before you can take them. So what determines the season is the spawn. And the spawn is based on conditions, fresh water, different things. There's more fresh water, there's more estuaries and stuff up there. So traditionally, it's always the crabbing's been better north of here on a consistent basis. It's like every 4 years. It takes a crab 4 to 5 years from the time it's born to become legal size. So here it's more like an 8-year cycle or 10-year cycle. In the course of my fishing, we've had some really good crabbing here. I don't know if I would put it as like when the season is really good up there, like it was this year. But there's good crabbing here, and it's changed. When they started protecting the sea otters they eat the small crabs. So our fishing close to the beach, where the otters range isn't what it used to be because they eat the crabs. They eat everything, But there'll be 2015. We had good crabbing up there, and we came home like we would normally start the season there, and then after February, we would come home and put the crab gear out here, and then March, April, the crabs would start to come out of the canyons a little bit, and we'd start catching some crab, and then the crabs molt in the springtime, or not. They breed first, and when they breed, the male crabs they stop biting. I mean, they're not hungry. All they're thinking about is breeding, and they do that for about 6 weeks, everywhere on the whole coast. Pretty much within a week or two, depending on where you are, they go through that portion of their cycle. And when they get done breeding, they haven't eaten for a month and a half. You catch them because they're hungry and they want the bait in the trap. And then after a couple of weeks of that, then they start to molt, which is when they get ready, their shell gets soft and they get ready to do their growing process for the next year. And then they're not marketable when they get soft like that. Hmm. But with the closures, with the whale closures that we've had starting in April, that's when the fishing here would normally start to get good. And we haven't been able to fish here for the last 4 or 5 years because of the early closure. Hmm. So we don't know what's going on.
So you said you stay here, or with the closures you can't stay here. So you do go up to Bodega and fish.
I did
that area and fish there, and then you just come back and kind of
be done. I mean, there's no. I came home this year and set the pots up here north of San Simeon on the way home, off of San Simeon down this way, and in the deeper water. And we went back and checked them the one time, and there was a few crabs, but not enough to make it worthwhile doing. And then the next week they closed the season. So we never had really a chance to look around or go down, to the southern grounds where we fish. Traditionally, the best crabbing here is down off of Point Sal, out in front of, Pismo area. you get to the north here and the bottom drops off real steep into the canyons, you know, the topography of Big Sur, well, it goes out into the ocean, and the crab's like kind of a flat, muddy area to move around in. They'll go out into the canyons, but they come out of the canyons, and where you catch them is in the flat, muddy area.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. I've kind of asked this, but in like a sideways way, but I'll ask it again. Do you think there is a hope for like continuation of the industry of fishing in general, like in Morro Bay specifically?
I think so. I think there'll always be something to do. I mean, like I said, back to the adapting. If you want your living to come from being on the ocean bad enough, you'll find some way and something that you can harvest and sell.
What would be some of your advice for like a new guy coming in, like your deckhand?
um, just try and be aware, and of what's going on, and be proactive, and try and let people. I see people on the dock, and I'll take the time to stop and explain what it is that I do, and just a brief overlay of what's happening in this business, because like I said, people don't know. It's so easy to not know where your food comes from, or who produces it, and what's going, the trouble that they might be having trying to produce that product for you to eat, you know, because you can get so many different things from so many different places. you know. Trader Joe's is a great store. They have all kinds of nice frozen seafood products. 95% of them don't come from this country. So should somebody, that has a regular job, that they want to eat fish, they're going to go, that's convenient. That's easy. It's affordable. To get what I catch, if you might have to pay a little bit more money for it. Um, you might have to go out of your way to, if somebody's to be set up like they were in Santa Barbara, you had a fisherman's farmer's market, or you had something, that is the big, farm to table, the big buzz thing that you see, for my operation to do that and go from bringing in 7,000 pounds to bringing in 700 pounds, I got to get 7 times as much money for that product. And is there enough people here that are willing to actually come and do that to support me and what I do? Or are they just going to stop at wherever? And there's Pier 46 seafood in Cascadero, or in Templeton, right where I live, 10 minutes from my house. Occasionally, they buy a couple hundred pounds of black cod from me, or if I have crab, they'll buy a couple hundred pounds of crab. They can't buy my whole load. And I'm not the only fisherman that is here that has something. It's not like I could have an exclusive. Hey, I don't want you to buy black cod from anybody but me. What if a week the weather's bad, or I'm sick and I don't go fishing and they need black? They're going to buy it from the guy at the boat over here, who's known them, as long as I have. That's part of the DeGarrimore family that has this dock, and that was Central Coast Seafood. They've been around forever. It's one of the nicest fish markets around, one of the nicest ones I've ever been in. They do a great business. They don't have to buy direct from fishermen. They do occasionally to convenience us, and if their delivery truck doesn't have, if they're having a hard time getting something, somebody has it, and they pay a little bit more money than if I sold it someplace else. But there's not enough of those places here that I could do my business model where I'm just going to come in and because I'm licensed to buy my own fish. I have all the licenses to do that and resell them myself. But at this point of my career, when I come in and used to be I come in and unload and turn around and go right back out the next day. I come in from being standing on my feet for 30 hours, which is literally what a black cod trip basically is. It's about a 30-hour trip, and I'm up for the whole 30 hours. It takes me a couple days to recuperate, So I don't want to come in and the next day or 2 days tired, be driving around in my truck trying to sell what I caught to make a little bit more. My time is worth more to me now than the money.
Mm-hmm.
But that's there for a younger guy, and that's kind of how you have to do it. If you want to, certain things, if you want to make it work, you got to sell yourself, or sell what you have.
Yeah. Mm. Is there anyone else I can talk to that you think would be a good conversation?
Who so far have you talked to?
Travis Evans.
That must have been interesting.
It's 3 hours long. Yeah. The Tognazzinis, Jimmy, Jeremiah, Trudy, Dean Heileman. I think that's it. Scott
Mather.
Yeah.
Will you talk to David Rose?
I tried. He
you tried?
He didn't want to be recorded, but I did have a conversation with him. Yeah.
I mean, Garrett would, if he would talk to you, he'd be a good one, because again, there's the young perspective. They had this. We're dealing with the wind issue and all this here, right? And I got selected to be on this working group, and I wanted to pick my alternate, and they thought that they should pick my alternate. The people that were putting this group together, and they picked Jeremiah and Alan. Did you talk to Alan over here?
Alan Aldred?
Alan, yeah. Allward?
No. Oh, Allward.
On the longfin?
No.
Anyway, they're both, probably 10-year my senior. And not to discredit Jeremiah, but Jeremiah hasn't been involved in anything but the albacore fishery for the last 20 years, pretty much. And hasn't really participated. He participated in a lot of the fisheries here back when things were different, And then he started doing the albacore stuff. And anyway, they're not really connected with what's really going on in the fishing industry right here, because they haven't been part of it for a long time. Alan goes albacore fishing. So they told me, well, we think these should be your alternates. And I said, no, I think that Garrett should be my alternate, because he's the one that's going to be more affected than anybody by this project, because he's going to grow into it. I'm growing out of the business, and maybe out of the business before this ever happens, if it ever happens, which I hope it doesn't. And they wouldn't let that happen, because they didn't want somebody on there that was going to butt heads with them about things, because the state lands and the Coastal Commission 20 years ago, when they laid the fiber optic cables, they were pro fishing. They cared about what was going on, and they made sure that the agencies that were going to disrupt things mitigated with the fishermen. The people that are in there now are more worried because of the political environment that we have in this state. That's more that's more job security for them than making sure that what happens for us is okay, regardless of what the hypocrisy is they've shut us down to save certain things, but it's okay for that to happen and not take those same things into consideration. So I made it to 2 meetings and I quit. I said, I'm not going to do this for 2.5 years, because what the outcome of this group in 2.5 years isn't going to stop what's getting ready to start right now. And by the time you're done, the damage is going to be done. And they're just going to move on and have to take no responsibility for anything. The ship the other day, we had really good fishing the first part of April. The first 3 trips we had really good fishing, and on the 19th we went out, and the boat had been here for 2 days about 8 miles above the area where I was fishing, and the fishing dropped off 67%. My catch from I took an average of the first 3 trips of April, the 4th trip, and April, May, June are usually our good months. It wasn't like, the fish are gone, it wasn't good. And then this last trip, I had the guy 3/10 of a mile from me, and where they're proposing to put this thing, they have to run the export cables that are the transmission lines that are going to come to either here, Diablo, or both.
So it was like a line laying boat.
This boat was doing the bottom mapping for the boat that's going to do the line, so they can figure out where it's going to go.
Okay.
This whole area has been, they have so much information because of back in the 70s when there was going to be oil exploration. We had all the seismic, and the technology, the way they sound the bottom, and the equipment that they use now is way different than it was back in the 70s and 80s. It's more advanced, it's more whatever. But it disrupts things, I've seen it because I've been around it. That group was supposed to figure out some kind of, this 7C working group, to figure out some kind of mitigation to stop these guys until more research could be done, and a baseline, what's going on here now, what's going to go on after you do this. I said, I see where this is going. I'm not going to spend 2.5 years of my life going to these meetings when it's happening already. So why are we wasting time talking about how we're going to take care of this when you're just letting it happen while we're doing this? But it's a job for all of them, all the litigation and the management meetings and all the stuff that fishermen spend the time to go to. They're not getting, we don't get paid. We take time off from what we do to go defend ourselves with people that are sitting in the room that get the cost of living increase every year, and it doesn't matter to them the outcome. It's not going to affect whether they put food on their table or not. You can only do that for so many years of your life, and why am I doing this? They don't care, truthfully,
Mm-hmm.
And if whichever organization that they're working for that writes their check, that's the way they're going to lean, because that's the way life is. I can't fault them for that, but I have to have my eyes open enough to know that that's how it works. Whoever your boss is, if you want to be in good graces with your boss who writes the check that your existence survives on, you're going to lean that way because you're worried that if you don't, you might not have a job. I mean, that's the world that we live in.
Yeah.
So that's all. When you think of it like that, how much time can I spend talking to deaf ears? Because they're checking a box. We talk to the fishermen, and then they can move forward, because that's part of the process. You have to listen to them. But does that mean they have to do what we ask or how we feel? No, that doesn't happen. So that's why, guys. I'm kind of bummed that Bob isn't going to talk to you. We have another the PCFFA, the Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen, trying to rebuild themselves into a stronger voice for the fishing industry, which they were years ago. He was going to be a director there, and we had the first Zoom meeting, and I was helping put it together, and he called me about 10 o'clock, and he said, "I'm not feeling it." I'm like, okay, so I'm doing it, because at least for this year, until maybe we got one other younger guy to take, because you got to spend time, a couple hours here, a couple hours there, but if you don't, I mean, it's easy for him or I because, I'm not looking at 10 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I was, but I physically won't be able to do this that much longer, as much as I'd like to. So maybe see if, I don't know your time frame. I know that the weather's bad this week. They wanted me to go fishing tomorrow and Sunday, and I'd bought tickets for this sheep thing at the Slow City Farm in town, and I was going to take my granddaughter. Garrett called me last night, and I said, I made plans 2 weeks ago with my granddaughter. I said, I'm not going to go. 20 years ago, I wouldn't have thought twice about not going. So.
Well, to end on a little happier note, when I was talking with Jimmy, he told me you mentioned some story about you and your glasses and a boat flipping. Can you tell me a little more about that?
So in that first year, well, actually the first year when I got on the boat on the Susan Marie, I have a couple glass stories, so I got to think. I'm pretty sure he's referring to the boat sinking. Is that that's the story? So I'd gone to work for this guy. We fished crab here that spring, February, March, April, and then he was getting the boat ready to go salmon fishing. So I went to work for another guy. That's somebody you could talk to too, is Jeff French. I don't know if anybody give you his name?
His name, but I haven't found his number yet.
I'll give you his phone number because I worked for Fred Cefalu, and then Fred would take his kids, because he had 3 boys. He would take one of them when he went salmon or albacore fishing for the summer. And the French's dad, Al French, was another crab fisherman here at that time in the 70s. And his 2 kids were going to college. So he needed somebody to go salmon fishing. So I went salmon fishing with him here locally. And then crab season started again, and I went back to work for Fred for the winter. So that now we're talking the winter of 75, 76. And I got Bob a job with Al. So we left, we went to San Francisco and fished for a month there, and then the season was going to open in Crescent City, and all the boats from San Francisco. The season was kind of slow, and we were all going to go to Crescent City, and Fred's dad was on the boat with us at that time in San Francisco. He was 74 at the time, his dad, and he would come on the boat, and he would drive the boat from up on top, and Fred ran the piece of machinery that hauled the pots up, and I would stack the pots and make the bait and do all that stuff. So we get up to Crescent City, and his dad decided I'm not going to make the trip. I'm too old. I don't want to go up there. It's cold. It's miserable. So we get to Crescent City, and Fred says, "So what's the deal with that friend of yours?" And I said, "Well, he's working for Al." He said, "We'll call him up. We need somebody." And I said, "But he's working for Al." He goes, "I don't care." All right. So I called Bob, and Al was understanding, knowing that, So Bob came up, and we were fishing for about a month, and we were on limits. We could only bring in so many pounds a day. And the weather was bad, and a few of the guys, the owners of the boats, got together, and they went to go to Mount Bachelor to go skiing. And the one boat that didn't go, the crew would go on that boat. From the different boats, the crews would go, and they'd go out and they'd catch everybody's limit and bring it in and deliver it, so that even though they weren't there, they were still, you know. So we're on this boat. Bob and I are both on the boat with this guy Victor, and we're fishing, and the weather's kind of, it wasn't real nice weather, and the boat took a real hard roll, and we didn't have, now they have inserts and people flood the tank, and everything was pretty crude back then. We were improvising, so there was too much water in the boat that wasn't contained, and the way it was contained wasn't proper. In the bottom of the boat, there's a shaft that drives the propeller, and there was a big box, what they call a shaft alley. So there had to be a whole lot of water in the boat, because they made a false bottom and they put the bin boards in to make the center like a tank. But the boat had these big wells throughout the fish hold, so they were all full of water. And wooden bin boards, they had them tied in with a piece of cut inner tube, to hold them in so they didn't float out. Mm-hmm. Well, the boat took a real hard roll, and all that water forced, a hard roll, and all that water forced through, this rubber stretch. The water all went to one side of the boat. And then when the boat came back, it didn't come back as hard as it went the other way. So the water didn't go back the other way. It stayed. So the boat went over on its side, and everybody on the boat was, there was 5 guys on the boat. The captain was like 22. I was 19, 23, and then there was one guy that was 50, Joe Messina. And anyway, Victor he got on the radio, and it was 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon in February, and we were off the Klamath River. It was cold. The water's 47 degrees. And anyway, he's turning the boat around in a circle, trying to get it to fall hard the other way for the water to go back. And the boat just kept going farther and farther to the side as he was. And then finally, the water just started coming over the stern. And we had to abandon. It was like there was no life raft, there was no survival suits, there was no life jackets. Everything was up in a part of the boat. There was no raft to begin with. They didn't really have survival suits back then. That was a new thing. But you're supposed to have at least a life jacket. And they didn't want anybody to go down into the fore part of the boat, because the water was coming in. The boat was getting ready to sink. And as the boat rolled, it kind of came back, and it started. And it was a 65-foot boat. It wasn't a small boat. Started sinking stern first, and everybody was running up the sides of the boat and jumping off the bow. And as Bob and I were the last 2 off the boat, and we'd been in the water, we were surfing up there in Brookings, and but in a wetsuit. It was still pretty much of a shock. But they had on the back of the cabin, there was the 2 wooden fish boxes that had extra buoys and rope and stuff in it, and we cut that loose as we went up and jumped off. And I remember swimming as hard as I could, 4, 5, 6 strokes, and kind of looking back over my shoulder and watch the tips of the outrigger poles. That was it. Boat was gone, and all 5 of us are in the water. And Bob and I swam around and picked up the odd buoys and stuff and put them in one of those wooden fish boxes, and we turned it upside down, and we all hung on to that. And I remember my boots off, coming off, and I had the big long winter socks on, and I'm treading water, staying afloat, and my legs are egg beater, and my socks are, and I'm thinking, the shark's gonna come bite my legs off because I'm trolling. My socks are gonna attract this thing. So I get my socks off, and I remember the one guy, Joe, the older guy, everybody else was pretty much okay. We got a call off. We had a deck brush with a hat on it, and you could see all the boats that, because we were running so many traps, we were still fishing, and everybody else was on their way back to Crescent City, the fleet that was down there that day, and they had all turned around. And we were drifting so fast with the current that where they were running for the position that he'd given on the radio where the boat sank, they just went right on by us, because we're just 5 little guys, and it's a pretty big swell, and anyway, they ran into the slick, and all the slick 3 miles from where the boat had actually sank, and they found us right at dark. It was just almost to where you couldn't see.
Wow.
And then they had to get us on the boat. So it was rough enough that they couldn't just, it's another big boat, and you can't just drive up on somebody because swell's going to push you over them, and somebody's going to get hurt. So they had you laugh, you see the little life ring like in the movie, where they throw the life ring, and everybody go, ha, 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 ha. Well, if it hadn't been for having a life ring, and they had a tire that they put over the side of the boat, so they came up swell. We're, over here 30 feet or whatever. They throw the life ring, and one guy would grab it at a time, and they pulled us over to the boat, and they had the time, because the boat was, you had to grab onto the tire and go down one time, and then when the boat came back up, there was the 2 deckhands were there, and they threw us on the boat one at a time, and yeah, everybody survived. But I lost my glasses, and they got left on the boat. Wallet, my personal belongings, was in the wheelhouse. And the guy that owned the boat, they had an insurance claim. They filed an insurance claim on the boat, and he got a beautiful brand new boat. I never got my glasses. He never even gave me the money for my fucking glasses, But we all survived, and that, other than Victor, who owned the boat, the other 3 guys never went on the ocean again. And Bob and I kept fishing. I thought he was. One time we were salmon fishing down here, and Bob was out of ice, and he was tying the salmon up on like a trout stringer, but just with a rope. The salmon are big, and I was putting them on my boat because I had ice, so we were drifting off of Point Conception, and he threw the rope that I was going to put the salmon in, and as I turned to look, the rope hit and knocked my glasses off. And I think with me, it's a thing with glasses, I've worn glasses my whole life, and I can't tell you how many pairs I've lost in the water or whatever, but yeah, we were pretty lucky to, we kind of looked at each other. We were staying in this hotel room in Crescent City, and the next day, when they brought us to the dock, everybody took off, because some of them lived in Ukiah, some of them lived in the Bay Area, and we lived all the way down here. We didn't have a car. We were just kind of stuck there. And the boats were going out the next day, and a couple guys needed a crew, So Bob was going to go out on one boat, and I was going to go out on another boat. We got ready to go, and the weather was horrible. I mean, there was a giant boat in front of us going out, and he was taking water over the top of the cabin. We were on small, this size boat and smaller, and we're standing on the back deck, not on the same boat, thinking, the hell are we doing? Everybody else is gone, and then we talked about it. So what are we going to do? And it was like, this is what we're going to do, so we continued doing it, still doing it.
Have there been any other times you in danger of?
No, I've been in some shitty weather. I wouldn't say that I've ever feared for my life. I don't know that I was actually fearing for my life at that time. I think the water was so cold and I was so young that I don't think I really ever thought about dying at that point. I thought about getting bit by a shark, and we were in the water for almost an hour in 47-degree water, and that's way above the life expectancy with no type of suit or anything, hypothermia. The old guy Joe, he just was screaming and yelling, and Victor, the guy who owned the boat, smacked him to get him to shut up, because he was in shock. And one of the other guys that was 23, that was a normal crew on that boat. Hey, are you there?
I saw your truck.
I'm on the boat doing that interview. Are you down there now?
I'm here.
Okay, I'll be by in a few.
Okay.
David Rose. Yeah, but I think I've always made sure that everything was in good operating condition, and real conscious about how I load the boat and how I op. I mean, most accidents are preventable. Some aren't, because the ocean's unforgiving. I mean, you can get stuck, and if you don't have the right boat, or you don't know how to steer the boat or plot your course in bad weather, and things can happen. I've been lucky. I'm no better than anybody else, but I do pay attention to what's going on, and I try and not put anybody in harm's way in what I do. And we've been lucky not to have any accidents. So, at one time I cut myself. I was alone, and I guess I have had a few things. We were fishing salmon at the Farallon Islands, and I had an old Monterey, and it had, in the hatch to go down into the fish hold, it had a little tray that I kept my groceries on. I didn't have an ice chest, so the fish hold had ice and stuff in it. It kept everything cool. And I anchored up, and I jumped down in the fish hold to ice the fish, and a bottle of cranberry juice had fallen, and it had shattered on the floor of the fish hold, and I didn't see it. I just jumped down in, and I knelt down, and a piece of the glass cut into my knee, into an artery, and it took me a while. I was bleeding pretty good, and I thought I was going to pass out. I didn't. I got out of the fish hole. I got up, and I called somebody, and I got it bandaged up, and I went to bed, and I woke up about 10 hours later, and still anchored there at the Farallon Islands. So that was one close call. Why you shouldn't be by yourself, because something can happen. You're cleaning salmon with a really sharp knife. You could cut, anything can happen. But back in those days, we didn't think about that. I fished alone. Everything I did by myself. And then at the dock, I used to have this boat over here, the Morning Light. I bought that boat in 2005, and completely rebuilt it. And we were fishing there in San Francisco, and it was an early morning. We were tied at the dock, and I was changing the running light on the side, and it was foggy. And I was standing up on the rail, and it drops down. The deck has a step in it, and I went to turn around, and my foot slipped, and I fell backwards. And luckily, I fell inside instead of outside. But I hit my shoulder on that. There's a big metal cleat. Hit my shoulder, knocked me out, and when I woke up, my shoulder was over here. I completely dislocated my shoulder from one side to the other, and I was fortunate to have gone this way instead of that way, because otherwise I would have drowned because I was unconscious. Again, by myself, I woke up and I was like, where am I? I had to call somebody, a friend, because I couldn't. Friend came, we started the boat, moved to the other side of the harbor over by Skoma's restaurant where there was a ladder, and I couldn't use this arm, so he got underneath me and pushed as I used one arm to go up the ladder, and then took me to the emergency room in San Francisco. And I was fishing again the next day, but it was interesting being in the emergency room there with all the homeless. It was in a bad part of the town, and it was about 4 hours before I could actually get in to have them look at me, and pretty crazy what was going on in the emergency room. I was waiting to get fixed up.
San Francisco can be a toss-up. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was. And then I walked from there back. It was over on the St. Francis Hospital, I think. It's the hospital that was that. But that's been about, I fell over the side one time down here. We were live fish fishing, and I had a different boat, very similar to this boat. And I don't know, I was in the back, and I just leaned over to do something, and the next thing I knew, I was in the water. And luckily, there was a guy with me. It was like this boat, you'd have a hard time by yourself. You couldn't get out of the water onto this boat without some kind of ladder or somebody to help you, because it's too straight up. It's too far to reach to grab the rail from being in the water. So that's the only other time I ended up in the water, when I didn't jump off the boat intentionally to go surf someplace where I was anchored, because that was a big part of our routine in the 70s and 80s. We fished rock cod down at Point Conception, and we surfed at the ranch all the time with nobody else. We were the only ones there. Now they have, guys that surf know a month ahead of time when the swell's going to be good and where it's going to be good. And we were when the swell would show up, the weather report didn't predict the swell or what direction it was going to come from. We'd be there fishing, and hey, let's quit a little early today. So
It sounds like you had a lot of adventures.
we did.
Yeah.
We did.
Well,
It's been a good life
yeah.
for me. So
Thanks for speaking with me.
you bet.
Yeah.
Good luck on your project. You want Jeff French's phone number?
Yeah, that'd be great.
He
Thank you.